Welcome back.
All right, folks. Now what we're going to do is we're going to show you a little bit about the inside of a toilet tank here, and also two ways you can save water and probably fix a problem that typically most people have. This is actually a ProFlow tank, similar makeup of most any standard tank, 2-inch flush valve, regular, just standard tank. This is probably what you're dealing with unless you have some type of a power flush or 1.28 gallon, but for demonstration purposes, this is what we're going to use. Typical calls that we get are toilets running, or we're getting some seepage down through the bowl. Usually what those are is one of two things, the flapper or the fill valve. This is a flush valve outside of the toilet. He's going to kind of show you the inside of the tank, what it looks like when it's actually in there.
This is the fill valve right here.
Also, again, for demonstration purposes, I'll hold this one in my hand so you can see what's going on.
Flush valve right here, and that's the flapper down here.
First thing you're going to want to do is you're going to disconnect the chain from the lever. That's going to give you access to the flapper. We're going to yank the flapper off. One second. Now we want to actually physically inspect the flappers. Dan's trying to get that one out.
All right.
And what you're looking for is a nice new flapper. Is going to be nice and pliable. It's going to be nice and straight. No waves, not soft, not spongy, not hard. If one's been worn, you're going to be able to tell as soon as you get that flapper out. Another thing you want to look for is Dan's got the flush valve in his hand.
This is where the flapper sits, so you have to make sure that's clean, not gouged, scratched up, or any piece of old flapper is sticking to it, because then the flapper's not going to seat in there. You won't have a good seal. And
any
you're gonna have
junk inside that flapper, the flapper's not going to seal. What I have here, this is typical standard corky flapper. Can be purchased at Lowe's, Home Depot, Ace Hardware, by us if you can't find it. This is a universal flapper. For most toilets, this is going to cover it. If for some reason you have a funky looking flapper, good idea is to bring it with you to the parts store so you're getting the right one. If your flapper has a float above it, where this float is actually above the flapper, you will have to replace it with the floated flapper or you are going to have issues. Typical issues are either the float's going to drop too fast, it's not going to flush, or if it stays open, it's going to double flush, meaning you're using twice the amount of water. We're going to flip the tank over real fast and we'll give you a real quick look at what it looks like to get this flush valve off. Once obviously you've shut off the water, disconnected the supply, and you have to undo the two bolts here that's going to relieve the tank from the bowl itself.
This is the tank to bowl gasket, which comes off. This nut would come off and you'd be sitting with something like this flush valve right here with this gasket. This gasket goes on the inside of the tank, it comes through, and then you tighten it with this nut, so you can see here how it's already through there. And then you would have to put a tank to bowl gasket on there once you took it off.
Now the key with this is if you get to the point that you have to replace this flush valve, 9 out of 10 ones you purchase are not going to have the tank to bowl gasket. You will need to purchase this separately. The trick with it is most of them will run a universal one. Sometimes like this one here, this is specified for a Mansfield toilet. So if I had a Mansfield, this is the tank to bowl kit that I'm looking for. And what it's going to come with is the gasket that Dan showed you, and then also the bolts, the nuts, and the washers to replace these inside the tank, making that a new seal. So we fixed that problem. We put it back together. Now the water's still continuing to run. Now we're going to be back to dealing with the fill valve. We've tried to adjust the water several times. It's just not working. It's time to replace the fill valve. Good news is, simple product, easy to do. This is a Fluid Master. Standard basic flush valve, works with about 98% of toilets. Even all the new ones are pretty much coming with these in there. Simple installation. Basically shut the water off. You're going to relieve the pressure. Dan's taking a little nut that's on the bottom off.
Right, you don't normally sponge the water out of the toilet tank or vacuum it out.
Yep.
Disconnect the water line.
Or you're going to have a mess.
Undo this nut here, then it just pulls out.
And typically what we tell people to start with these, just to get you in kind of the reference of the tank height, take the fill valve, slide that little lock ring that was right here back, lay it on your tank. Kind of put this to the bottom, and what you're shooting for to start with is about 1 inch low from the top of the tank to the top of this valve. Lock it back down. I'm going to hand this off to Dan. Oop, maybe. Dan's going to tighten it up.
Yeah, maybe not.
And then back to, oh, you ain't really got to.
No, your tube right there.
Yeah, back to the tube. This tube, this is going to go from the fill valve to your flush valve. Typically what you want to do, stick it on the fill valve first, start feeding it into the hole that's on the top of the flush valve. Insert it no more than 1 inch. What a lot of people like to do is, well, I got all this extra hose, I'll just keep feeding it in here and feeding it in here. Well, unfortunately, what that's going to do is if this gets to a point lower, now you've just created a siphon. So this is actually going to start sucking water back out of your tank, really creating a problem. That's definitely something you don't want to do.
That's going to make the toilet keep running.
Keep running. Now, that's basically just a regular old flapper. Some of you have the older Mansfield, so we did bring in Mansfield just so you could get an idea of what it looks like. It's a little bit different. This is a plunger assembly. This is what's actually flushing the toilet. So typically this would sit in there like that. Your fill valve's connected over here. This is about the basic layout. That little lever is actually going to your tank handle. Typical call on this one is I'm trying to flush my toilet, but I feel like I'm going to break the toilet handle, or I actually did break my toilet handle. So what I want to do at that point, once again, shut the water off, right? We don't want to cause a flood. We're going to disconnect the fill valve tube out of the flush valve. This is going to unscrew. Now, as I'm lifting this, I'm going to rotate this off of the handle. Plunger's going to come free. First thing you want to do with that,
You check the bottom to make sure that it's clean and not scored. And usually if that flapper ring goes bad, it sticks to this. So you need to clean this off because otherwise it's not going to seat solidly.
this red ring right here, this is actually your seal. This comes out just like this. This is typically about a $4 part. Most important, when you actually look at it, it'll probably be pink, cupped, really out of shape. Drop your new one down. There's a little groove right there that you'll feel when this gets in there. And just to verify, turn it. If it turns freely, it's right in the right spot. Take your plunger, slop it about halfway down, slip it onto the handle, put that back down, screw your cap back on, put your tube back in, you're good to go. If you ever have to replace this cylinder, the key with this is do always bring this with you. There are two different types of these. One's a 3.2 gallon, one's a 1.6. If you put the 1.6 on a 3.2, you are going to be short of what you need to flush, and if you do the opposite, you're going to be flushing more than what you need to. So now that we've covered the toilets, what we're going to do is we're going to break for a second, and then when we come back, we're actually going to get a little bit more technical. We're going to work on an electric water heater, give you a couple tips on this, on what you can do. One, work on it yourself, and two, a little bit of the maintenance. So we'll see you back here in a second.